Yep, morning everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Um, right, thank you for coming along to the session. Obviously we're here to talk to you about Northamptonshire Council's housing and homelessness service. Just go to the next slide, Chloe, please. So just to give you an overview, so Northamptonshire Council's housing service comprises three main areas. So that's housing strategy and solutions, tenancy services, which is our landlord function, and then our property and development services as well. So we're going to give you an overview of all three areas. And the first area that we're going to move to is housing solutions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Garen and I work in the housing allocations team, and our team is responsible for the operational management of the housing register in North Northamptonshire. So our primary role is to assess applications and allocate vacant council and registered provider properties to those in the greatest needs, ensuring that we make best use of available housing stock to meet the diverse needs of our community. So just a bit of a background about our team and why we do what we do. So all local housing authorities are required by law to have a scheme for determining priorities and procedures when allocating social housing. The primary legislation governing the allocation of social housing is Part 6 of the Housing Act 1996 as amended. And this legislation requires councils to make all allocations and nominations in accordance with a published housing allocation scheme, which determines the priorities between applicants for housing and sets out the procedures to be followed when allocating housing. So Keyways is the council's choice-based letting scheme, and it provides a single access point to good quality, affordable housing for people in housing need, and aims to make the task of applying for social housing as simple as possible. The scheme sets out who is eligible and qualifies for social housing in North Northamptonshire, and how the council decides who should have priority for the properties that become available. So on a day-to-day basis, landlords advertise their vacant properties on the Keyways website, and applicants who would like to live in those properties register their bid through their account online. Properties are then allocated in accordance with the procedures and priorities that are set out in the scheme. So North Northamptonshire, like many areas nationally, really, is facing an increase in demand for social housing that far outweighs supply. So in that context, Keyways does offer households with a housing need some choice in bidding for a home, while giving reasonable preference to those in the greatest housing need and with a local connection to North Northamptonshire. So some of the reasonable preference criteria includes people who are homeless, as defined in Part 7 of the Housing Act, people that are occupying insanitary, overcrowded, or otherwise unsatisfactory housing, people who need to move on medical or welfare grounds, including grounds relating to a disability, and people who need to move to a particular locality within the district to avoid hardship to themselves or others. Keyways applies to new applicants and existing social rented housing tenants who are looking to transfer with the same or another social landlord. And the accommodation allocated through the scheme includes housing for social and affordable rent, which is owned and managed both by the council and by housing associations operating in the area. So we work with around about 29 different registered providers. Some are national, so they'll be across the country, but some are very local to North Northants. So in addition to the primary legislation under Part 6 of the Housing Act, Keyways takes full account of secondary legislation, associated statutory codes of guidance, statutory instruments, case laws, and relevant strategies. So if we could just move to the second slide. Thank you. So due to the nature of our service, we work with a range of internal services and external partners to support our customers and ensure that we make best use of the limited properties that become available. So this collaboration extends beyond the teams that you'll hear from today and includes government departments, including the Ministry of Defence, Home Office, Department for Work and Pensions. It includes registered providers. That's the 29 registered providers that I mentioned that we work with very closely. Charities such as Citizens Advice, Accommodation Concern, and those linked to the armed forces community, healthcare services and providers, social services, police and probation services, domestic abuse services, including refuge providers, supported housing providers, and more. So we are faced with the challenging task of carefully balancing the needs of everyone on our housing register with the limited resources and housing availability. We do take our safeguarding responsibilities very seriously. The team is committed to actively identifying concerns and making the relevant referrals to various agencies to ensure that our customers receive the right support. We also regularly attend meetings and case conferences for a wide range of cases where we collaboratively assess challenges and risks, and that's together with our partners. We develop multi-agency wraparound support plans for vulnerable households, addressing their safeguard needs and working together to identify suitable housing solutions. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of Keyways. So if we move on to the next slide, and next presenter, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Davis. I'm the interim homelessness manager here at Northants Council, and I manage the day-to-day operational housing, advice and homelessness service of the council. Can I have the next slide, please? So what does the Housing, Advice and Homelessness Service do? So we provide free and confidential advice for anybody who is either homeless or at risk of homelessness. The legislation sets out that it's within the risk of homelessness is within 56 days, but we want to be made aware and start working with anybody who is at risk of homelessness as soon as possible. So we wouldn't turn anybody away if they came to us and said, I've had a notice and it's 3 months. We would start working with them from that point. We wouldn't say, sorry, the legislation says it's 56 days. We want to start working with them and look at what prevention work we can do. So when somebody approaches us, the first thing that the service will do is complete a triage in line with the legislation to determine what duties are owed. So those duties will be looking at, is that person eligible? So do they have rights in the UK, recourse to public funds? And is that person homeless or threatened with homelessness? And that will determine what duty is owed to that person. So if we've got a customer who has received a notice and is threatened with homelessness, they will go into our prevention duty. And if we have somebody who approaches us and they are homeless on the day, they will go straight into our relief duty. Then from what we do from those duties, they're both treated the same in that they both will receive a full housing assessment where we go through all of their needs of the whole household, and looking at what support can be put in place. We will create a personalised housing plan to either prevent or relieve their homelessness. Now that personalised housing plan will include steps that include looking for alternative housing, joining our housing register. Can we support somebody with maximising their benefits? Do they need to be referred to other support services? So for sort of floating tenancy support, is there any drug or alcohol issues within the household? Those kind of things, so that we're not just looking at somebody's housing need, we're looking at that person, that household, and everything that they need to support them to move on successfully to new accommodation. So that links in with our next step, is that we will refer and link in with our partner agencies to provide that wraparound support to specific customer needs with the aim of tenancy sustainment. So in our first step is we want to try and keep somebody where they are. If we can, we want to prevent them from becoming homeless from that address. If not, we want to be able to sustain them in a tenancy that is settled, moving them from that address. And then if somebody is homeless, and they've gone into the relief duty, we have to assess whether that household is in priority need and whether they trigger a duty to be provided with temporary accommodation. So there are some criteria where it's straightforward, black and white. If a household has got dependent children and they are homeless on the day, they trigger priority needs for temporary accommodation. And then there are other assessments that we have to make, which are more complicated depending on the person's actual needs and vulnerabilities. I have the next slide. So we are, our primary legislation is Part 7 of the Housing Act, and our secondary legislation was the Homeless Reduction Act 2017, which came into force in 2018, and that brought the new duties of our prevention relief, our full housing assessments, and our production of our personalised housing plans. There are lots of other legislation that I won't go through today, but it's all on this slide. The next slide, please. So this slide and the next one goes through our statutory process and the questions. It's a bit of a flow chart that we go through that will ascertain whether somebody is homeless, threatened with homelessness, if they're eligible for our services, and which duty that they're going to go in. So again, this is a bit long-winded, but you'll get these slides sent out after this, so you'll be able to go through it in your own time. Can I have the skip and then skip that one as well, I think. So then this is how can our partners help us and help our shared customers and people that we work with. So if you're working with somebody and you know that they're either homeless or threatened with homelessness and they're not currently working with the housing options team, you can make a referral to us. You do need to ensure that you have the customer's consent to do so, but you can use our online tool, which is the Jigsaw Alert tool. The link's on these slides. So you will create a profile for yourself, filling in your details, and you'll be able to track online any referrals that you'll make. You will then fill in basic information about the person that you're referring to us, including any identified needs and support. I would say it says fill in basic information. Fill in as much information as you can. If you think that there's more information in the questions that are being asked, don't specify it. There's a free text box at the end where you can just fill it with anything that we might need to know about that person, especially if they've got dependent children in the household, they've got a partner in the household. If you can provide us with names and dates of birth, that just really assists us when we're creating cases and setting them up on our systems. And then once you've filled in all that information, you just click submit. And as I said, you're able to track it, see if it's been accepted, see we might reject it on the basis that we already have an open case, but then we'll have your contact details and be able to link in with you about that case. But it's all done online, and that's really is the best way to get that referral made through to our housing service. I can have the next one, please. So some service specific initiatives. We have got health and housing roles. So that's a partnership with Kettering General Hospital and NHFT, where we have funding for 2 health and housing advisors to support patients that are facing housing issues while they're in hospital, and with the aim to aid timely discharge and to prevent any bed blocking. So currently we've got 1 person in post, and we do have a vacant role in this health and housing, but it really does help with the hospital and their issues with bed blocking, and it helps us when timely referrals are made through, so that we are aware of somebody who is facing homelessness and their needs, specific needs, especially if they're leaving hospital, medical. Are they going to trigger temporary accommodation? We have got the accommodation for ex-offenders scheme. So this is a government funded scheme to help reduce reoffending and homelessness by supporting ex-offenders who might otherwise become homeless, to access specifically properties in the private rented sector. So we receive referrals from probation mainly, for the accommodation for ex-offenders scheme, sometimes direct from prison, but they are accepted across the board. So if you're working with an offender who has left prison within the last 12 months, you can make a referral into the AFIO team for support to help them to find accommodation. And we also have our transition supported housing model, which is growing. So this is, there's 7 HMOs, so houses of multiple occupation across Northants, with 3 bedrooms in each property. And they are low level support to provide independent living skills and progress on a pathway so that somebody's able to live independently in their own tenancy. This scheme specifically is for those that are considered not in priority needs, and they wouldn't trigger a temporary accommodation duty under homelessness. But it really does help to sort of upskill people and give them the confidence to live independently. And then how we support people. So I've already touched on part of our processes. So we complete that initial triage and full housing assessment. That takes into consideration a full needs and risk assessment, which informs our personalised housing plans. So our personalised housing plans include actions for housing options officers and for the customers themselves. That includes referrals on to support services and other agencies, so that we can promote close partnership working for positive outcomes for the people that we're supporting jointly. We have ongoing reviews and monitoring with our people. So we have regular check-ins to assess progress and well-being, update our personalised housing plans so as and when actions are completed. We can slowly add more actions. I mean, you might have somebody who approaches and we're quite able and confident that we could give them a raft of actions and we know that they can go away and they'll get them completed. But we might have somebody where we slowly have to give them one action at a time. And as one action's completed, we then add another action on for them to complete. And we also take a multidisciplinary approach. So we hold meetings and case conferences to consider the most challenging and risky people that we work with and agree multi-agency wraparound support plans specifically for our vulnerable households and those where there's safeguarding needs.
Thanks, Claire. Just to introduce myself, so I'm Ed Frost and I'm the temporary accommodation team leader. So I manage the temporary accommodation service. If we could move on to our next slide, just wanted to begin by providing an overview of our service and just provide you with some information on some of our key roles and responsibilities as a team. So we work closely with all our households living in temporary accommodation, ultimately to ensure that anyone placed into TA is able to positively move out of their accommodation and into more secure and suitable accommodation as soon as possible. And that really ensures that any household stay in temporary accommodation is for as short a time as possible. Our team have housing management responsibilities for the properties that we manage, and that includes completing routine property inspections promptly and dealing with repair, antisocial behaviour, or any other issues that relate to a household's temporary accommodation placement. All households that are placed into TA are required to pay temporary accommodation charges, so we work with our households to ensure that housing benefit claims are processed as soon as possible, and where applicable, we agree appropriate payment plans. The team allocate all temporary accommodation properties in accordance with our temporary accommodation policy and in line with homelessness legislation, and we let our properties in line with our own letting procedures. As a service, we support people living in TA to ensure that they're given the best chance to sustain their accommodation placement, and that includes working closely with other services and organisations and attending multi-agency and adult risk management meetings. We have a responsive duty service in the team, and that allows us to respond to incoming inquiries and crisis presentations. We usually have an officer on duty in the Corby, Kettering and Wellingborough areas where possible. And we also have a dedicated officer dealing with our inbox, so picking up and actioning all email and telephone inquiries that come in on the day. The team keep accurate, detailed records of all our accommodation placements, and we place a great importance on recording all types of contacts with people living in temporary accommodation on our case management system. And our team also manage the process of households leaving temporary accommodation, whether that is households who have left their placement to move into their new permanent accommodation, or sometimes there can be cases where we have had to terminate an accommodation placement due to issues with a person's behaviour where there have been breaches of their accommodation agreement. If we could move on to the next slide, that'd be great. So we currently have 214 households living in TA under Section 188 and 193 of the Housing Act 96. Around a third of those placements are single people. We're currently seeing between 30 to 40 new placements per month, with a similar number of households leaving temporary accommodation as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we allocate households to temporary accommodation in accordance with our policy and homeless legislation. So we will always try to accommodate a household in their home area if we can. A hotel placement for us is always a last resort. Unfortunately, we are in a position where sometimes we have no choice but to offer hotel accommodation in the first instance due to us having a limited number of available properties in the area. We will always aim for no placements outside of the Northamptonshire area. Currently, we do have 0 out-of-area placements, which is really positive. As a council, we have not breached the 6-week rule, so that means that no family has spent longer than 6 weeks in any form of B&B or hotel accommodation, and we will always focus and do everything that we can to provide suitable accommodation to any people requiring emergency accommodation. If we could go on to the next slide. So regarding the types of temporary accommodation that we utilise, we have council-owned units across Kettering, Wellingborough and Corby. These properties are all managed by our temporary accommodation team. We also use nightly paid self-contained accommodation via our accommodation providers that have been accepted onto our procurement framework. We also have nightly paid HMOs that we use as temporary accommodation for some of our single people, and these properties are managed by one of our accommodation providers. And as I said previously, we do use hotel accommodation through places like the Travelodge and Premier Inn in cases where we're not able to secure any alternative accommodation. Just on to the next slide. Within our temporary accommodation service, we have a newly created tenancy support team, and our tenancy support team are currently providing support to 56 single people living in temporary accommodation. And their work has led to a significant reduction of single people having their temporary accommodation duties discharged to their behaviour. Each single person living in temporary accommodation is assessed by our team, and that really helps us to determine the level of support that that person needs. Any people with complex needs will be supported, and we will work closely with services and organisations to try and achieve positive outcomes. Our tenancy support workers will assist practically in helping people to sustain their accommodation placement, but also working closely with other organisations and attending multi-agency meetings where appropriate. I just wanted to share a couple of case studies from our tenancy support team where we've had to place vulnerable single people with multiple complex needs and where we have achieved positive outcomes working collaboratively with other services. So the first case study I wanted to share is regarding a vulnerable person that was placed into our accommodation. This person had a diagnosis of autism and significant learning difficulties. Although this individual was placed into temporary accommodation, he had been really struggling to sustain his placement, and at the time of his entry into his accommodation, there were no other organisations or services involved in supporting the individual. Due to the vulnerabilities and the risk relating to the individual remaining in temporary accommodation, the tenancy support worker for the case arranged a multi-agency meeting with attendance from the police, adult social care, health and housing. And as a result of the multi-agency work to support this individual, there was complete agreement in the meeting that this person did not have the ability to manage his own accommodation placement. And subsequently, we worked with adult social care and specialist accommodation through adult social care's brokerage scheme was secured, which was a really positive outcome to ensure that the individual could receive the support he desperately needs, and a really great example of multiple services coming together to support a vulnerable person. The second case study that I just want to share before I finish involves a single person who was wheelchair bound following the loss of one of his legs. This individual had to be placed into hotel accommodation as we had no adapted properties available at the time. And the person really struggled to cope in hotel accommodation without care and support. He struggled to clean himself and to look after his room. His tenancy support worker completed a safeguarding referral to adult social care and worked with his new social worker to secure a twice daily care package to provide the individual with much needed care to sustain his hotel accommodation placement. Subsequently, the tenancy support worker then worked with our temporary accommodation team, and we managed to secure a fully wheelchair accessible self-contained property that we could let to this individual as temporary accommodation. And we later converted the accommodation, working with our landlord services, into a permanent tenancy, which was a really good outcome to ensure the person did not have to move twice in quick succession. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. So I'm going to cover some details of our rough sleeping service. So our rough sleeper coordinator, Sarah Laycock, would normally present these slides, but she can't be with us today, unfortunately. So hence I'm covering for her. Thank you, Chloe. So just to talk through what the rough sleeping service does. So they will conduct assertive outreach across Northamptonshire during the day and at night. So that is early morning and late at night when people are likely to be found bedded down. They provide an in-reach support service to those who've been accommodated under the council's discretionary powers and in our in-house supported accommodation provision. They have a strong presence in the local community and conduct housing advice drop-ins and advice surgeries. They work with key partners to provide wraparound support. So, you know, multi-agency support plans are day to day in this service. They provide a single point of contact for rough sleeping and provide advocacy for individuals. They conduct rough sleeper assessments, and they can be done in our offices or out and about on the street. And they produce tailored support plans for all individuals as well. They support individuals into accommodation directly from the streets and collate and monitor intelligence on rough sleep and information and data. So the street outreach sessions where the team go out looking for people bedded down, those sessions are intelligence led. So we receive lots of information through StreetLink, through partners, members of the public. So all of the intelligence is gathered to inform where the team go out on any day or night. They manage and organise SWEP, which is our severe weather emergency protocol, all year round. SWEP is actually activated at the moment, and I've got a slide on that in a bit. They complete government returns and lead on the annual rough sleeper estimate. So every year the government does require us to complete a snapshot count and an estimate. So that actually took place last month. And the team will support and safeguard individuals at crisis and lead on multi-agency support planning as well. So the rough sleeping team, the team has certainly grown considerably in size over the last sort of couple of years. So we've got Sarah, our rough sleeper coordinator. We've got a number of rough sleeper workers, including a senior rough sleeper worker. The team has its dedicated housing options advisor. That's something that we developed a couple of years ago because actually we felt that having a housing options advisor placed directly in that team had so many benefits. The team has its own adult social care worker, an accommodation liaison officer. The team also has a tenancy support team that's for our dedicated specialist supported housing for people with complex needs and who have a history of entrenched rough sleeping. And most recently, we've got our public health funded treatment team. So colleagues from NHFT and CGL, and we've got a mental health nurse and a support worker, a non-medical prescriber, drug and alcohol recovery coordinators and champions, and a substance misuse physical health nurse. So the treatment team, with half the individuals engaged by the rough sleeping team having drug and alcohol support needs and a third with mental health needs, there was clear data that evidenced the need for access to specialist support. I think inherently the teams found it quite difficult to get people into these services. So a public health initiative basically funded specialist wraparound support roles for people rough sleeping and to actually embed these specialist service within that rough sleeping team. So the roles are clinically line managed by NHFT and CGL, but as I said, they're based within the rough sleeping team and work alongside the council's rough sleeping team daily. So the aim of the new treatment team is to make sure that people experiencing rough sleeping increase engagement, they can sustain treatment by improving access to pathways via an outreach approach. So, you know, it's quite common for people with complex needs. It's very difficult to get them to attend appointments and actually engage with some of the support that's available. But by actually having that outreach support and being able to offer that out and about in locations has been really, really valuable. So safeguarding plays a huge part of the team's day-to-day, as it does with everybody in the housing service. But rough sleeper workers conduct early morning and late night outreach sessions. As I said before, they take an intelligence-led approach and they look for people bedded down. And they'll also check on the welfare of known rough sleepers who, for whatever reason, might not have been able to agree to accept the help that's available at that moment in time. So for those who might not be ready to leave rough sleeping and leave the streets, they will conduct welfare checks on those people. Vulnerable people are supported by multidisciplinary teams and safeguarding processes, and actually many individuals known to the team will have an active adult risk management meeting in place as well. The rough sleeping team have a strong community presence, so they work within the local community in a range of locations that you can see on the diagram. Obviously, it's a great opportunity for them to engage with individuals affected by rough sleeping who might not come into council offices or want to engage with people out on with the rough sleeping team while they're out conducting outreach. But they can provide advice and guidance alongside key partners. So it's a nice approach to partnership working to be able to support this vulnerable cohort. Thanks, Chloe. So another complicated flowchart similar to Claire's flowchart in housing options. So I won't talk it through, but obviously the slides will be shared for people to take a more detailed look at this flowchart. But basically it just sets out the pathway that we follow for every person who is identified as rough sleeping and how they'll be supported by the team. Following the process, make sure that everyone is assessed in line with homelessness legislation, and obviously they're supported off the streets as quickly as possible. So the total number of rough sleepers seen each month has remained at a similar level so far this year. But while the number remains the same, it's not the same number of people that are found during each snapshot. So there is quite a high flow of new people that start rough sleeping. And obviously, you know, the team work with them people and move them on. And then come the following month, there's a new cohort of people that are found sleeping rough on the street. So while the figure each month remains the same, there is a constant flow of new people that unfortunately find themselves rough sleeping. The team will collect a range of data in relation to obviously who they are, where they've come from, what their housing history is like, whether they've slept rough before, and obviously, you know, a range of support needs, whether they're offending behaviour, mental health, physical health, substance misuse. So I mentioned earlier the Severe Weather Emergency Protocol, which you may or may not know as SWEP, which actually got activated yesterday in light of the freezing temperatures and the sprinkling of snow that we had in Northamptonshire as well. So extreme weather increases the risk of death or serious illness to people who sleep rough. So we put in place measures to ensure those who are known to be sleeping rough aren't at further risk. So for those who are identified as rough sleeping during periods of severe weather, the team will move quickly to arrange suitable emergency accommodation that we call SWEP accommodation as quickly as they can. So, you know, really, really important, any person who's known to be sleeping rough will have already been offered advice and assistance by the rough sleeping team and encouraged to engage with that support. So the team's offer is the same all year round, regardless of whether or not SWEP is activated. But we do find that when SWEP is activated, you know, those freezing temperatures and, you know, snow on the ground, actually it does help to encourage groups who are more difficult to reach or who wouldn't ordinarily engage at other times of the year. There's no single definition to severe weather, so we do take a common sense approach. The rough sleeping coordinator will decide on whether or not SWEP is triggered, taking into account a range of factors using the Met Office forecast. So supported accommodation, you know, I'm sure many services are experiencing that people that are accessing our services are becoming more and more complex with sort of multiple needs, and that's the same for people who we find sleeping rough. So it's really important that the team find the right move on pathway that actually meets that person's needs and prevents a return to rough sleeping. So our most entrenched rough sleepers with complex support needs are referred into our government funded supported accommodation. Now, some of that's delivered by Accommodation Concern, who deliver floating support in sort of self-contained accommodation. And we've also got our own in-house specialist supported accommodation as well that's based on the Housing First principles. So our in-house provision is called Never Give Up. They're all one-bedroom self-contained units in different locations across Northamptonshire. As I've said, they're housing first principles, so it is very much the housing is provided first and the wraparound support and the engagement comes afterwards. It's not a solution for everybody, but it's certainly a solution for those who aren't able to access or sustain any other forms of accommodation. So the residents are provided with intensive support, but it is resident-led, and they do have their own dedicated tenancy support worker so that they can actually get that consistency in approach and build up that trust and rapport with their worker, because that's really, really important. So how can you help? We have, we receive so much information from people all over letting us know about people that are rough sleeping and asking what they can do to help. So if you spot anyone rough sleeping in Northamptonshire, we kindly ask that you contact the rough sleeping team using the details on the slide. Please, please, please provide as much information as you can on the location. The team will often receive emails or messages saying, "Oh, they've seen someone in the park." Well, what park and in exactly what location? Because some of these green spaces and other spaces, are so vast. And the team are out early in the morning, late at night with a lot of ground to cover. So the more information on the location or a description of the person or what it is that you've seen that leads you to believe someone's rough sleeping is always really, really appreciated. If you need to report someone that's sleeping rough outside of office hours, then the council does have an out of hours service, and the numbers on screen also. Equally, if any colleagues would like to go out with the rough sleeping team on an early morning or late night street outreach session to look for and offer help and support to people found bedded down, please contact the team. They're always really happy to have volunteers go out and join them on sessions and experience what it is that they're doing week in, week out throughout the year. And I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. So finally, we've got some information from us as a landlord services. So I'm Leona Mantle and I'm the Tenancy Services Manager for Kettering. And also on the call, we've got Jackie Martin, who is the Tenancy Team Manager for the Corby area. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Okay, as a landlord services, we've got just over 8,000 homes in our management. So it's really important to acknowledge that, while we are a significant landlord, there is significant demand for those properties. Most of our properties are general needs, but we do have over 900 sheltered accommodation properties. So that's a mix of 1 and 2 beds. It's important to specify which is sheltered accommodation. Sheltered accommodation is for people over the age of 55 in some schemes, and some schemes are over 60. But the idea is that we have people who are wishing to remain living independently within our communities, but would benefit from additional support. So our shelter schemes clearly work very closely with our colleagues in adult social care and with our health and social care providers. So it would be really helpful just to give an idea of the number of properties that we do have. As you've heard from the rest of the team, demand on our services is significant, with a huge demand on our 1-bed properties and our larger family units of accommodation. So as you can see, we've just got almost 2,500 1-bedroom properties, but a large proportion of those are within our sheltered schemes. And you've just got the details here. We have the significant pressure on people needing larger accommodation, specifically larger adapted accommodation. And you can see the reducing numbers as those properties get bigger. Now, the main service that we provide, obviously, is tenancy management. Now, our properties are allocated through our Keyways allocation scheme, and we offer introductory tenancies to our new tenants, which means that we provide an intensive management and support service, specifically in the first probationary year, but thereafter based upon needs and assessments. After 12 months, if the intro tenancy has been conducted satisfactorily, that will convert to a secure tenancy, and the support can and will remain. In terms of our rents, the majority of our homes are let at social rent, so that the accommodation is affordable to them. Although our new builds are let at affordable rents, which is about 80% of the market rent. And just to give you an idea of those costs, really, social rent on average is about £93 and affordable rent £137 per week. And as a team, we also provide leasehold management to our 910 leasehold properties as well. We could go on to the next slide, please. So as a team, our housing teams consist of a number of neighbourhood managers and housing officers and support workers. We provide very, very specific pre-tenancy advice. We make sure that any new tenancy starts with accompanied viewings for all prospective tenants and just a really comprehensive sign up for all tenants so that everyone is aware of responsibilities and rights as a council tenant. We provide intensive tenancy and estate management, and every single tenant will have a named housing officer so that they have a point of contact. They will also have a named income officer as well, so that if they have any issues within their tenancy, they have named officers that they can contact. Now, as I said, we've got 900 homes within sheltered housing schemes offered supported living to people over the age of 55. And in addition to that, we provide a dispersed alarm service, providing a community alarm service to over 100 residents within our general needs properties as well, providing that supported accommodation in a dispersed way. We've got our 910 leasehold properties that we provide intensive management for as well. And our team also provides a financial inclusion and tenancy support service. As you've heard from our other colleagues, our tenants can have multiple and complex needs. So it's very important that if our tenants have come through pathways such as rough sleeping or homelessness, that intensive support is handed over and continues so that any new tenancy, especially any secure tenancy, is able to be sustained, because that's the aim, to ensure that cycle of homelessness is reduced and that people have the skills and the support in order to sustain their own tenancies. It's also very important for us to ensure that our tenants are involved in our decision making, and we have formal and informal structures of communication with tenants, such as our tenant panels. We have a tenant scrutiny group, and we also have means of communicating with tenants as well, such as at the moment, a paper newsletter. So information can be shared with our wider group of tenants. Now, when things are not going as well, we do have a dedicated antisocial behaviour team. And the team are there specifically to support and enforce both the victims and the perpetrators. And the aim is to resolve those disputes. It is quite rare that resolution results in enforcement. It is more common that through our risk assessment approach and our team working, our multi-agency approach to dealing with antisocial behaviour, we're more likely to resolve disputes by providing support to both victim and perpetrator. We have a dedicated income management team who will monitor, enforce, but mainly support and advise tenants that have difficulties with paying their rents and service charges and any other charges. And they work intensively with our financial inclusion and tenancy support teams as well. Another specialist service that we provide is aids and adaptations, and we work incredibly closely with our community OT colleagues just to ensure that properties are suitable for the needs of tenants, and that is wherever it's practical or reasonable to do so. We'll carry out adaptations to properties to provide accessible homes for people. With our reletting, last year we had 610 homes that we relet. So that's the process of viewing and intensively managing for the first 12 months. So that meant that 600 households were accommodated in our stock, many for the first time. So you know, that's a case of ensuring that those 600 households have all the skills, knowledge and support needed in order to sustain a tenancy. Another thing that our team has to do is admin our right to buy process. So we're currently selling approximately 50 homes per year through our right to buy service. The next slide, please. I just wanted to really highlight, in terms of safeguarding, for us, it's about those key contacts that we have with our tenants, and specifically those key contacts that we have with tenants that leads us into their homes. And so I wanted to give you just a snapshot of how we as landlord services, including our repairs colleagues, how often we actually visit our properties. So I'm just going to start at the top of this. So we have our tenancy visits for our introductory tenants, and we have we have a settling in visit within the first 6 weeks. And then we aim to have the introductory tenancy visits at 3, 6, and 9 months. If there are problems emerging, clearly we will engage with our partners. We'll work in a multi-disciplinary way to ensure that that support is provided around that tenant. But as a minimum, there's those 4 visits within the first 12 months of any new tenancy. Our repairs colleagues will then visit to carry out an annual gas safety check. And that is done, as it says, that is done yearly. And that is a statutory requirement. So we have to get into every property that has a gas supply to carry out that annual gas safety check. And we will work very intensively with our colleagues in our gas team and our contracting team to ensure that all of those properties have been accessed to carry out that safety check. And that does sometimes lead to enforcement action, but we do get into every property. We also have a team that carries out the periodic electric checks as well in our properties to ensure statutory compliance with electrical safety. More frequently, our responsive repair team are in properties on a very regular basis, carrying out responsive repairs. So that could be from, you know, I've got a problem with my loo not flushing, my lights are not working. Any responsive repairs that are landlord responsibility, our responsive repair team will be out and will carry out those repairs. As a service, we have committed to carrying out tenancy audits, which means that as a minimum of once every 3 years, we'll visit every property as a housing management team to ensure that we've got the right people in the right property, and that the residents are aware of the support services that are available through the council to make sure that they are living well, that they are living successfully, independently, and they're able and happy to maintain their current property. It's an opportunity to inspect the property, and make sure that there are no outstanding repairs, and that there's no damp or mold, for example, that the property is being used to its best, and that there's no overcrowding and or under occupation of the property. One thing that we look at in those visits is we make sure that, you know, are there any adaptations that we could make to the home that would allow the tenants to remain living independently. But we also have those conversations if people are not utilising their whole property of, you know, have you considered moving to something that may be smaller and more manageable? So it's just opening those conversations to make sure that we've got the right people in the right properties at the right time of their life, really. And again, with the right support around them. And as always in any service, there are always the ad hoc visits. So we're always visiting in responses to requests. It may be that we have a bereavement. So we have a joint tenant and one party to that tenancy has passed away. So we need to visit and, you know, make sure that the remaining person knows of their rights of succession to that property, and the you know, it may be at those times of crisis, a household that previously coped and managed perfectly well suddenly needs additional support in order to sustain that tenancy. I had a quick question that popped up that I will answer, and which was, if someone's under occupying a property, can you force them to move? No, we can't. We can't force them to move. But what we do have is we do have incentive schemes and intensive support. So what we find is that sometimes if people don't want to move, we can't force that. But sometimes people think, I would possibly move, but it's just too difficult. It's too expensive, or I just cannot cope with doing it. So it's the people that we can sort of nudge towards moving that we will incentivize to move through our incentive schemes, and those are quite successful. Now, with all of these home visits, if there are any safeguarding concerns that are identified, or any just concerns at all, there's always feedback to our senior officer. Our frontline officers regularly make safeguarding referrals and instigate adult risk management processes as well. If you go on to the next slide, my colleague Jackie is going to take you through some case studies. We've got 3 short case studies. I'm realizing we don't have much time left, but Jackie's going to go through the first one. I'm going to do the second, and then Jackie's going to do the final one, just so that you can attach a little bit of reality to what I've been talking about. Thank you, Jackie. Jackie, you're on mute.
Hello, we'll try that again. Hello, I'm Jackie Martin. I'm the tenancy team manager at Corby. As Leona said, thanks Leona for passing over. I'm going to take you through some case studies where, working together with internal and external agencies, we have had some positive outcomes to assist our tenants to sustain their tenancy. And these have been tenants with some multiple and complex needs. So the first one was a lovely young lady who presented as a care leaver. And as you can see from the slide, it was her first tenancy. She had already been given a notice of seeking possession when the support services gathered around her. She was open to the Children's Trust and currently had a child protection plan in place. And she had disengaged from her mental health support. So what we needed to do was help this young lady to maintain her tenancy, deal with the debt, and look at her property conditions, because obviously that was in breach of her tenancy also. We needed to establish a home for her. We needed to make sure that she had all the white goods and everything in place. So the first part was that we got core group together, we got housing officers involved, and in Corby we have a financial inclusion officer who we refer to for more intensive support. UC claim had gone horribly wrong for her, council tax, debt, Charity Link were involved, community law, the social worker, Home Start, and again, you know, power or energy. It was at crisis point with her gas and electric. Working together collaboratively with all of our internal and external agencies, we managed to assist her to get her debt cleared. Got her utility bills, got some backdated money to assist to make sure that her gas and electric remained on in the property. We had a nice backdated claim for her council tax, and Charity Link provided her with the white goods. We got the garden cleared, and the positive point on this from the child protection point of view was that it was stepped down, and the young lady is managing her tenancy currently with ongoing support from financial inclusion and from the housing officer. So there was dedicated support within landlord services, and this young lady is sustaining her tenancy currently. So that was a positive outcome for this young lady. Moving on, hoarding. Were you going to take this one? This was one in Kettering, Leona.
Yeah, happy to, Jackie. Hoarding case, and this I think is a display that this was a presentation where a contractor who was a gas engineer was carrying out an annual gas safety check and was concerned at what he thought was low-level hoarding in the property, that was going into the communal area as well in the block of flats. So it was really important to get in support for the tenant with reducing the level of belongings, to allow access, because at that time there was no access for cooking and bathing. but also to adhere to our sterile block policy as well, to reduce risk to other people within the area. So again, who was involved, and through our housing team, adult social care and the fire service, we worked with the tenant to start to reduce the level of belongings within the property. And as an outcome, the success really is a new and ongoing relationship with the housing officer to provide that support, to provide regular visits and that check-in to establish that tenant-like behaviour. I want to just show you the next slide, which is the presenting information. So you can see here the risk was that the tenant didn't have safe access to cooking and bathing. But if you look at the next slide, although it's not immaculate, actually, we have here a significant difference where the tenant can now fully access all of those areas that he needs to safely access. So next slide is our third case study. Back to you, Jackie.
Okay, this one, as Leona said earlier, very, very difficult to get large properties. We don't have a large number. So this case was presented with us. It was a family requiring 4 beds with ground floor accessible for living and bathing. So working alongside our aids and adaptations team and the occupational therapists, we if you look at the next slide, it will give you a better idea of what happened. So we had a property which was able to be adapted, and we were able to put an extension on the rear of that property to allow this family to remain together, and the downstairs was converted into a bathing facilities and an extra bedroom. So the property was adapted for the family by adding that extension. So that was a positive outcome for our family, working alongside all of the other agencies. So last slide, thank you very much. In Corby, if you need to be in touch with landlord services, you'll see our email address there. And for the catering team, that one's there as well. Thank you very much.